Hills family, welcome to this week's online teaching. My family has a range of TV preferences. My wife and I, we don't enjoy the same TV shows. My older boys and my younger daughter don't really enjoy the same shows, and so it is extremely difficult for us to find a show that we all enjoy and that is age appropriate. But there's one show that we have watched for 7, 8, 10 years. We've watched almost every episode from the first episode of the season to the last episode of the season, and that is the TV show Alone. Alone, it is a reality show where 10 contestants are dropped off in a remote location. And I don't mean like they're dropped off together. They are dropped off individually, miles apart from each other. So one's here, one here, and one here. And they are given and can choose 10 items to take with them to help them to survive. And the last person standing is the winner and wins $500,000. Now, they can't just take any 10 items. There's a select list of different items that they can choose from, but they can take 10. So, for example, they can take fishing hooks, but they can't take a fishing rod or a fishing pole. They can take a bow and 10 arrows is all they get. But it's not a modern compound bow. It's just the old-fashioned regular pull-it-back bow with tension on it. They can take that. Most contestants will take a tarp and a knife and an axe and a cooking pot. But your 10 items go a sleeping bag, a very warm sleeping bag. Oh, because I forgot to mention, most of the locations are in Arctic places. And they're dropped off in late September, so they have just enough time to build a shelter before the extreme winter conditions come in. And these are survival experts. And I've watched the show enough to know when they're making a mistake. If someone stops focusing on getting food, for example, because they have no food, that's not one of the items they can take. So they're dropped off, no food. There's no grocery stores, no one they can call. They have a satellite phone that they use when they're ready to tap out. Like they don't have updates of like are there 2 people left? Like I can keep going, because they might be 4 or 5 weeks in and nobody's dropped out yet. Like they don't know. And so, but sometimes they make mistakes, and one of the mistakes is to focus like on their shelter instead of getting food. And when somebody does that, like we know, like, oh, their time is short. And so I've watched all these episodes of Alone, and basically I am a survival expert. I've watched so much. Now I wasn't in Boy Scouts growing up, and I've never attempted to stay someplace overnight with just a few items. Like if I go camping, I've got the tent and I bring food and I do all the things. But I'm basically an expert just by watching the show. No, that's not the way it works, right? Like, so if you were tasked with surviving and you could bring one person with you, knowing that I've watched 100 episodes of Alone and I have critiqued many people from afar, you would not choose me as the person to help you survive in that type of setting, because I'm not a participant. I'm just watching. You don't become an expert just by watching somebody else do the stuff. The only way to become an expert is to get out there and to do it and to live it. And I think our faith is a little bit like that. Like it's a lived faith, and Jesus is calling us not just to be spectators or consumers, but to participate with him. And the church, from its inception, was not designed for a few religious professionals to carry out the work of the church. In fact, my task as a pastor is to equip you to live out your faith and for you to use the gifts that God has given you. And the point is not just to read and talk about the Bible. Like, we do that. We should do that. And but that's just would be like my family, how we enjoy Alone. But our call is to live out and to join the story of God. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says about this. Ephesians chapter 4. He says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. According to these verses, who is doing the work? The people. The people watching, the people who are part of the Hills Church. It's not the professional, it's not the pastor. It is the people doing the work of the ministry. Like I want you to know and to read the Bible. But if that is the extent, if that is the end of our faith, we're doing it wrong. And reading the Bible and even praying, but never living out the realities of what we find in the Bible, what we find in Scripture. It's akin to me watching the TV show Alone and thinking I'm a survival expert. That's just not the way it works. And what we see in the Bible is people living out their faith just day by day. The early believers, they lived the way of Jesus on mission. And some were called to go. You got Paul and others who were called to go, but most of the folks were just ordinary working folks who stayed, and they had families, and they had jobs, and they had financial concerns, and they had conflict in relationships. But as they lived their life, they brought the gospel and they lived out their faith. And so what I'd like to do this morning is to give you 4 practices in one posture that will help us live out our faith. And this is for everybody. This is for the elders in the church. This is for the newcomers in the church. This is for the person who is new to the faith. This is for the teenager. This is for the elementary student. Can begin to live out our faith. This is for someone who is a person of means or someone who is on food stamps. Like, this is for all of us. And these practices are practices at the Hills Church that we've been talking about since we were meeting in our house, only in our house, back in 2017, trying to figure out, like, what does it look like for us to be on mission with Jesus in Denver? And so it's the same question that we're coming back to today. And recently I was having a conversation with someone in the church, some good friends of ours, and mentioned these practices. And they've been part of the church for a couple years now. And we're like, yeah, I think we've heard something about that. And I was like, oh no. Like, 'cause in my mind, I'm like, oh, we talk about this all the time. Everybody knows about this. And it was an eye-opener to me that I have failed recently in keeping these practices in front of the church. And so this morning, if you've been part of the Hills Church for a little while, it's going to be a bit of review. You've heard this before, and that's okay. Sometimes we need reminders and to get back on track. For the rest of us, this may be new. And what you're going to hear this morning, it comes from and I forgot, let me grab it. That's my book right over here. These practices come from this little book called Surprise the World, 5 Habits of Highly Missional People. And we've taken these same practices and these same habits, and we've kind of condensed them a little bit, so it's not exactly like this. But next Sunday, when we gather at Hallett, I invite you, if you do not have this book, I will have I have like 25, 30 copies of the book, and if we run out, I'll get more. So make sure to pick the book up. It's about 100 pages, and they're short pages, right? Like this is an afternoon read, a Saturday afternoon kind of read. So make sure to pick that up next Sunday. But the 5 practices that we have talked about before, we use the acronym BELLS, and it stands for bless, eat, listen, learn, and send. Bless, eat, listen, learn, and send. The first habit that will help you live out your faith is blessing others. Blessing others. And it looks like it practically bless one person every week. Find one person and bless somebody every week. And now this work is a little tricky. We want you to bless people inside the church and people outside the church. It's to kind of rotate Like one week, maybe bless someone in your micro church, and the next week, someone, a neighbor, a coworker, a family member who's not part of the Hills Church. But bless someone every week. Now, how do I know if I'm loving my neighbors? That was our topic last Sunday. Well, have you blessed anyone lately? Have you blessed any of your neighbors lately? Would any of them say that you've blessed them? What does it mean to bless someone? Where I grew up, bless your heart was not a compliment, but a polite, it meant like, bless your heart, you dummy, was basically what we meant. That's not what we're talking about. Bless means to confer prosperity or happiness upon another. To confer prosperity or happiness upon another. To bless someone is to build them up, to encourage them. Anything that maybe relieves a burden in life, or anything that helps them breathe more easily. Anything that lifts their spirits or alleviates their distress. And as a church, we want to do this corporately as a church, but also individually. We want to bless our neighbors. And practically, blessing can fall into three categories, really. And the first one is a word of affirmation. Now, words of affirmation are probably the easiest way to bless someone, because it can be a simple text, it can be an email, or an old-fashioned handwritten note. Like those go a long way. Mark Twain once said that I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. And isn't that true? Like when someone gives you a well thought out compliment, like not something fluffy, but something that speaks to your character. Gary Chapman in the 5 Love Languages talks about words of affirmation being one of the ways that people experience love. And he describes it as verbal support to communicate love. That's what a word of affirmation is. And so when was the last time that you shared a good, thoughtful word of encouragement with somebody, with a neighbor, with somebody in your family? Yeah, like this isn't just good for church stuff. This is good for family stuff as well. So you have words of affirmation, and then you have an act of kindness. An act of kindness. Like who doesn't feel blessed when someone does something kind for them, or some type of practical support, maybe babysitting for an exhausted parent, or cutting an old lady's lawn, or helping a neighbor move. And these acts of kindness, they lighten the recipient's load. And on Google, just a quick search, I came across acts of kindness for kids. Now these are for kids, but this is good for all of us. Hold the door open for someone. Tell a joke. Return someone's cart at the store. Give candy to your bank teller. Leave a letter in a library book. Let someone go ahead of you in line. Wash someone's car. Write a thank you note for your mail carrier. Bake a dessert for a neighbor. Check in on an elderly neighbor. Buy a coffee for a stranger. Talk to someone new at school. Weed or shovel for a neighbor. Bring flowers to your teacher. Tell the manager how good your service was. Call a friend you haven't seen in a while to say hello. Hold the door open for someone. Bring cookies to the custodian. Help make dinner. Bring your neighbor's garbage cans up for them. Give a candy bar to the bus driver. Make muffins for your pharmacist. That's fairly specific. Smile at everybody. It's contagious. Now, some of these acts of kindness, they also fall into the category of gift giving. Gift giving. And when we talk about gift giving as a way to bless someone, it doesn't have to be something expensive. It could be something small. It could be something handmade. But again, a gift is just a way to let people know we care, that we love them, to be a blessing. So take a moment to consider who this coming week you can bless. And how will you bless them? Will it be a word of affirmation? Will it be an act of service? Will it be a gift, giving a gift? So that's the first practice, blessing. The second practice, the E stands for eat. And at the Hills Church, we are we are professionals when it comes to eating and sharing meals. But the practice is, for us to live out, is to share one meal a week with someone you don't live with. And it could be, we say a meal, but it could be a coffee, it could be grilled cheese. It doesn't have to be fancy. guys living at the crossing. It could be as simple as inviting someone new to sit with you while you have a meal together. Now, why do we make sharing a meal such a central part of the Hills Church? And I think it's because it's the way of Jesus. It's the way of Jesus. New Testament scholar Robert Karras once said that in Luke's gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. Like Jesus is always around meals. Jesus was around meals so often that he was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. Those are just old school words for meaning someone who eats too much and someone who drinks too much. That's because Jesus was always at meals, and his guest list was always getting him in trouble. Like he was with the tax collectors and the prostitutes and people who, like the religious people, are like, nah, we're good. But that was the ministry of Jesus, was around meals and showing hospitality. And it's interesting. What did Jesus tell us to do when we gathered? Did he tell us to sing? Mm-mm. Did he tell us to preach and to teach? Mm-mm. He did not. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't do those things. There's other places in the New Testament where we see the early church doing those things. But Jesus specifically, well, listen to what he told us to do. In Luke 22, and he took bread. He gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this, have a meal in remembrance of me." The table, sharing meal, ought to be the primary symbol of the Christian gathering because it represents hospitality and grace. And there's so much to say about sharing meals that we see from the life of Jesus. A couple years ago, we had a full sermon series on the meals of Jesus. In the concluding section of his book, A Meal with Jesus, Tim Chester, he sums up the significance of the role of meals in the kingdom of God when he says, Jesus didn't run projects, establish ministries, create programs, or put on events. He ate meals. If you routinely share meals and you have a passion for Jesus, then you'll be doing mission. It's not that meals save people. People are saved through the gospel message, but meals will create natural opportunities to share that message in a context that resonates powerfully with what you're saying. Who will you share a meal with in the next week? We bless, we eat, and we listen. We listen. We listen to the voice of the Spirit. We listen to the voice of the Spirit. We need to be listening to and directed by God's Spirit. Because if you are blessing people on a regular basis, if you're sharing meals with people, whether they're part of the church or not, there are going to be moments when the Spirit of God wants to work through you, to speak through you. Maybe you're speaking to you're sharing a meal or blessing someone who's faced a rough patch in their marriage. Or maybe somebody at work and they're trying to decide, like, do I take this job? Do I leave this job? Or maybe someone else is trying to figure out what job they should, like they don't have a job. And there's going to be opportunities for us to minister if we are listening to the Spirit. And so the idea is, like, we take one portion of time a week and we sit down and we block out distractions. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our prayer series. And we quiet ourselves and we invite the Spirit of God to speak to us, and we're quiet. And we're silent and we listen, and the better we get at listening and quieting ourselves when we're by ourselves, we'll be able to better hear the Spirit then when we are ministering to people. It reminds me of my high school basketball coach. In practice, in our basketball practice, he would never use a whistle. Like most coaches use a whistle, run, go here. He wanted to train us to hear his voice during a game when he wasn't allowed to use a whistle. So what would happen in practice is we knew, like if we're doing a drill, so you got multiple basketballs going and guys, stop, running around. So you got all the noises in the gym going on. And if the coach said, "Let's go," like whatever you were doing, you had to immediately stop and run to the huddle. So like if you were about to take a shot and the ball's right here and you heard the coach say, "Let's go," you had to, if you shot, everybody on the team had to get on the line and we would run sprints. until we were sick. Because the coach wanted us to train us to hear his voice when it mattered. And so in private, we train ourselves to hear the voice of God so that when we're out doing the work, doing the ministry, we can hear the voice of God. And so we bless, we eat, we listen, and fourth, we learn. The final practice, we learn. With this practice, we want to take one portion of the week to learn Christ. To learn Christ. Learn Christ is an expression, it's an older expression from earlier Christians, but it means like learning the way of Jesus. And the best way to do that is to read about Jesus in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That is where we see how Jesus lived his life. Because it is, again, as we're out there taking this step into the story of God, being on mission with Jesus, like we need to know, like, what would Jesus do? Like if he were me in this day, in this time, like how would he answer this? What questions would he ask? Like how would he minister? And if we don't have a good understanding or foundation for who Jesus is, like we can get off track real quick. And so we want to take one portion of the week to learn Jesus. These are the four practices that will move us from being a spectator to participant in the mission of God. And again, this is for everybody. This is for every Jesus follower. Like there's no exemptions. No reason that you can't do this. So there's four practices, but then there's one posture, because it's the acronym BELLS, and so that final S is not so much an action as it is a posture, a demeanor, and that final S is sent. Begin to identify yourself as a sent one. Like we have all been sent by Jesus. This was his last command to his disciples, was to go, to be sent. And so we are witnesses of and witnesses about Jesus. And now this doesn't mean that we're all supposed to go stand on the street corner and shout it out, but it means as we're living our ordinary, regular lives, going about our days, going about our business, that we are being intentional about being on mission with Jesus. In the first centuries after Jesus, the early church, they were just a ragtag group of nobodies. They didn't particularly have any influence. They were very much in the minority. They weren't wielding power in politics or anything like that. Yet, they turned the empire upside down. And it's because they embraced practices like this. Now, they didn't have this acronym. They didn't speak English. But they were just ordinary folks living their lives and doing just acts of service, sacrificial acts of kindness. They loved their enemies. They forgave their persecutors. They cared for the poor. They fed the hungry. Like they were living out their faith. And in the brutality of the Roman Empire, they were the most stunningly different people anyone had ever seen. Like they didn't know what to do with these Christians. In fact, the Emperor Julian in the 4th century, so in the 300s, the Christians got his attention. And he feared that they would one day take over the empire. And so he refers to Christians as atheists, because they didn't believe in the pagan deities and they just had one God. So he calls them atheists. And he believed that their religion was a sickness. And so with that in mind, listen to what this Emperor Julian, says about the early church. We must pay special attention to this point, and by this means effect a cure for the sickness of Christianity. For when it came about that the poor were neglected and overlooked by the Roman pagan priest, then I think the impious Galileans, he's talking about Christians, observed this fact and devoted themselves to philanthropy. And they have gained ascendancy in the worst of deeds through the credit they win for such practices. For just as those who entice children with a cake, and by throwing it to them 2 or 3 times induce them to follow them, and then when they're far away from their friends cast them aboard a ship and sell them as slaves, by the same method, I say, the Galileans also begin with their so-called love feast, or hospitality, or service of tables, for they have many ways of carrying it out, and hence call it by many names. And the result is that they have led very many into atheism. Julian was concerned that the Christians' acts of kindness, of sharing meals with neighbors, was winning too many of his subjects to Christianity. And so he decided to launch a counter attack. And so he mobilized his officials and the pagan priesthood, and he called them to out-love the Christians. And so he decreed that a system of food distribution be started and that hostels be built for poor travelers. And perhaps not surprisingly, Julian's new social program, it failed. It failed because he couldn't motivate the pagan priests or the Roman officials to care that much for the poor. He failed to realize that Christians were filled with the Spirit and were living from a place of grace, and having received the love of God, were offering that to others. And so they shared this message that this God who loved the world, which the pagan deities, they didn't care about humanity. So it was weird, it was odd, but yet many were attracted and became followers of Jesus. And this is where Christians, they lived out their faith, feeding the poor, welcoming all regardless of their status. And they promoted liberating social relations between male and female. And the noblemen embraced the slave, and they blessed their neighbors. They shared meals together. Friends, let me invite you into the adventure to not just be a spectator, but to be on mission with Jesus. Grace and peace.